Hi, welcome to 2024 and to Real Turkey channel. This is our first video. And as usual, as we had done in the last 5 years or so, we're going to tackle very weighty subjects about Turkey. I'm still preoccupied with this really nasty business of making predictions for 2024, which in my case usually lasts until December 2024 because you have to update them every day. But anyhow, I already explained what awaits Turkish economy in 2024 in my past video. Today, obviously, I'm going to talk about Turkish politics. 2024 is really a very critical year. I'm going to talk about four events that will set the course for the next 10 years in the Turkish politics. This sounds overly ambitious, but give me a hear. Listen to me for the next 15 minutes. Essentially, Turkey is at the fork on the road between a full dictatorship, or if you want me to be polite, politically polite, authoritarianism a la Russia and China, or some modicum of democracy. Obviously, as long as Erdogan is in power, Turkey will never be a full democracy. But while he's in power, Turkey might still make some progress about democracy. And I don't want to deviate too much from the main subject, but if you follow the economic literature, there is a very strong correlation between democratic standards of a nation and its potential or its achievement in economic development. In other words, while there are exceptions, usually, non-resource rich countries tend to be more democratic and vice versa. So this, to me, is a very weighty subject. If you ask me, how can we make Turkey richer, with the exception of finding a huge oil field, I would say we need better democracy. But I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about four events, starting with end March municipal elections, then the constitutional debate that is almost certain to follow that election. Three, the EU's decision about what to do with Turkey, and finally, American presidential elections. I'm sure hundreds of millions of people are eagerly awaiting the outcome of that elections. But Mr. Putin and Mr. Erdogan are in a separate league of their own. They have so much to hope for from Trump. A couple of weeks ago, I shot a video titled Last Stand of Democracy in Turkey. It was about end March local elections, but poor titling. Look, I'm an amateur at this, okay? So it didn't sell too well. Now, Turkish opposition lost May presidential and parliamentary elections to Erdogan and his allies led by nationalist Bahçeli. That was a huge blow to democracy, but they still have one more chance to preserve a sort of a balance of power, to preserve an ability to have a say in Turkish politics in these local elections. What is at stake here? Turkey has 81 provinces, which have hundreds of districts or compartments, boroughs, counties, etc. Maybe 4,000 offices are up for fall election. But what's at stake here is at most a dozen large cities, which generates almost all economic output and harbors most of the population. You win these, you are a partner in the central government in the sense that you have a say in what they do. More importantly, you draw huge financial resources with which to serve your constituency as well as to fill your coffers for general elections. In 2019, CHP, with the help of the then opposition alliance led by center-right EU party and smaller parties, have won Istanbul, Ankara, Izmir, Adana, Antalya, Mersin, Eskişehir. In fact, if you count the top 12 Turkish provinces by population, I think they only lost Bursa and perhaps even Balıkesir. Now, clearly, I can't talk about all of the cities. I'm going to concentrate on two major cities, Ankara and Istanbul, which generates a huge amount of economic power for the winner. Izmir, also a very large and wealthy city at the Aegean coast, traditionally votes for CHP. And no matter whom CHP nominates as a candidate, the results are very unlikely to change. Just like Konya and Sivas, two major Anatolian powerhouses are always won by AKP candidate. If you look at the polls, both in Istanbul and Ankara, the incumbent mayors, Mr. Mansur Yavaş in Ankara and Ekrem İmamoğlu in Istanbul, are ahead. In fact, that's sort of verified by the fact that Mr. Erdogan can't find a candidate to beat either. They're genuinely popular beyond their party bases because they have done well for their constituents. So they are a hard it's very challenging to beat them. But I still predict with 70% probability that Mr. Erdogan will win. 70% probability Ekrem İmamoğlu will be defeated. Probably 60% probability Mansur Yavaş will be replaced by an AKP mayor. In terms of second-tier cities, Eskişehir probably will remain in CHP hands, but Adana, Antalya, and Mersin could go either way. Now, why do I think, despite the polls, that Mr. Erdogan is going to emerge victorious again? Well, because he has done so in the past. The guy is a genius in terms of concocting ideas or agendas that solidifies and radicalizes its own base. Currently, despite the limited success of the Mehmet Şimşek-led economic stabilization program, the economy is in a mess. The day I shot this video, Turkey's 2023 inflation was announced. It was 65%. Broad-based unemployment is over 20%. And 50% of those who work draw around the minimum wage. So, misery, poverty. But he still wins simply because he convinces people that if he is gone, things will be worse. That's a subject I'm going to address later on. But he also has very stalwart allies like MHP. The two parties combined control roughly 45% of the vote, which goes up and down by 5 percentage points compared to CHP's 22%. Now, in the past, CHP has put together a coalition, as I've said, and increased its votes above its national total. This time, E-Party is not cooperating, and the smaller parties are really not that important in municipal elections. And of course, if Erdogan can't win fairly, then he will resort to cheating, as he has always done. The High Election Council, which is the ultimate judge or referee of elections, will schedule another round. Ekrem İmamoğlu, Mansur Yavaş will be banned from politics for one reason or other. And voila, Bob is your uncle. And Mr. X is the mayor of Ankara. Mr. Y is the, IKP mayor of Istanbul. And I think at that point, Turkish opposition will cease to exist de facto. De jure, there will always be an opposition, but it will never have any chance of beating Mr. Erdogan, which means a lot of opposition voters will simply tune out politics. They will create a new private life and simply not pay attention to politics. And Turkey will be on its way to a dictatorship. Now, the last step in that is a tiny technical detail, which is that according to the current constitution, Mr. Erdogan is not eligible to run in the next elections. And of course, like Putin, he wants to change that. This is why for the last 2 years, AKP and MHP have been talking up this new and improved constitution that would give all of us more rights. Yeah, right. Of course not. The new constitution would be even more fascist than the current one. It's not going to improve anything except to make it possible for Mr. Erdogan to run a third time and possibly to change the way presidents are elected. Again, this will be topic of another video. Currently, Mr. Erdogan and Bahçeli have 326 or 25 seats, and it takes at least 360 seats to even take a constitutional amendment to a national referendum. And I think over 400 yes votes to have it ratified in the Grand Assembly. Now, I bet that Mr. Erdogan would find it relatively easy to find enough votes to amend the constitution and then present it to the people to be ratified in a national referendum. So, Turkey will face another election, possibly in early 2025, or another ballot where Mr. Erdogan's future would be at stake. And if, as I predict, he wins the local elections, opposition voters won't bother to go to the polls and Mr. Erdogan will by a landslide. That's basically a dictatorship. He already controls the judiciary, the military, the police. And if Turkey didn't have a really lively and very traditional opposition, party politics, he would have become a dictator by now. And I think within a year, he could solve that problem. Of course, things could be different, not only because I may be wrong in my dire scenario about local elections, but there are other factors in consideration here, and this is the next part of the video. Turkey has a customs union agreement with EU, which means goods, not services, and not agricultural commodities, but goods can circulate freely between the two economic blocs without, any customs taxes or barriers. That was signed in 1995 and it's very aged. And currently it's working against Turkish business people for reasons I have explained in a previous video. But put it this way, Turkey wants a new customs union agreement that would broaden it to services and agriculture, as well as get rid of all the clauses that make it very disadvantageous for Turkish business people to compete in the European markets. Now, EU understands the need to re-anchor Turkey. If EU wants to expand to Ukraine, which is a decision I wholeheartedly praise, or even to Georgia or to Western Balkans, you look at that map and there's a huge black hole there if you keep excluding Turkey. I mean, how can you foster economic development, peace, stability, and security when you have a huge nation in the middle, which is very angry and frustrated with EU and creates problems and competes in terms of getting the attention or getting the loyalty of the countries that you want to add to your economic bloc? Of course, with Turkey's human rights record, we are not fit for EU membership. But some clever heads in EU devised this two-track negotiation idea. Let's leave membership aside. Let's just talk about the economy of the matter, and that's the customs union. Why is it so important? Because customs union would not only increase trade between two countries, it would also help to unify the trade regimes and possibly even the judicial regimes. In other words, above and beyond its mutual economic benefits, it would also increase Turkish integration to EU in social and political matters. And if the EU in the mid-year summit greenlights new negotiations with Turkey, it might eventually persuade Erdogan that to get even more from the EU in economic terms, he needs to loosen on domestic oppression. I'm not saying he will, but you know how we are. I mean, if there is a reward, then then we can, pay the price. If there is no reward, why bother to do the things that the EU wants us to do? So this to me is probably one of the most critical decisions that EU will make. Unfortunately, I don't think they have the wisdom to even grant Turkey the right to negotiate a new customs union. Once again, there is the Greek Cypriots. There are countries like Netherlands, which hate not only Turks, all immigrants and Muslims, but most importantly, it's so unwieldy to reach a consensus decision with 28 members now, or maybe 30. I mean, you have seen what happened to Ukrainian aid because Mr. Viktor Orban decided to veto it. So there's only a slim hope. I would say maybe 30% chance that negotiations on a new customs union will start. So that's also fairly negative. And finally, American presidential elections. I do comment on American presidential elections. I'm an expert at commenting about stuff about which I have no expertise about. But this time I'll go by the polls. The recent spate of polls show that more likely than not, Mr. Trump will win. Now, to me, this is a disaster, not only for the United States, but for the world, not because of Mr. Trump's ideological preferences, but because he's crazy. I'm sorry. The guy is a narcissistic. He's completely taken by himself, and he's a loose cannon. You never know what he's going to do. So it's a bad news for the world economy and world politics, but it's good news for two people, Mr. Putin and Mr. Erdogan. In his first term, Mr. Trump has gotten along very well with Putin, too well, in fact, and also with Mr. Erdogan. If he is re-elected, Turkish democracy will certainly disappear because, unlike a democratic candidate, he's not even going to bother to tell Turkey what to do with its own politics. From an economic and political perspective, it is much easier to reach a deal between Erdogan and Trump than Erdogan and the presumptive democratic candidate, which is Biden. So again, this is a mixed bag. If Trump gets re-elected, Turkish economy will do better. We will solve some of the nasty problems between the United States and Turkey, about which I'm, preparing a video. But if Biden or another Democrat wins, they will constantly pressure or enter into a dialogue with Turkey to improve human rights, at least to get rid of the most ugliest aspects of this oppressive dictatorial regime. So that's it for you, folks. That's Turkish politics in 2024. 4 critical events: local elections, the constitutional debate, EU Leaders Summit, and of course, American presidential elections. I want to thank you for your loyal support of this channel, and I hope to be with you as long as I have something to say on this channel. Have a good year. I wish you all mental health at these crazy times. This is Atilla Yaşılara saying goodbye from Istanbul.